Hi, this is Scott with Android Guys, and I'm sitting here, as always, with Luke.
Hey, how's it going?
What's going on, Luke?
Not a whole lot.
So we have been taking a historical look or a oral history at all the different versions of Android.
Yes.
Feels like we've been at it a while.
Yeah.
Feels like we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
Android's been around a lot longer than I think people realize.
Yeah.
We are going to cover Android 4.1 Jelly Bean.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this will actually be 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3, and this will encompass about a year of time.
Sure.
But this was interesting. I mean, you look back at it, and some of these things feel like just yesterday when they were announced.
Right.
Some of the features that were introduced in the software.
Mm-hmm.
For folks who haven't listened to any of these episodes, what we do is we'll basically pick a key version of Android and look at it from the perspective of what was added to Android that made that noteworthy, what made it possible to do certain things with our phones,
Right.
and what we'll also talk about some of the devices of that era.
Mm-hmm.
Some that were introduced with the launches of Android and some that were just key phones of the day.
Right.
So with this one, we're going to go back to July 9th, officially 2012,
Yeah.
for Android 4.1 Jelly Bean.
Mm-hmm.
For the sake of just keeping it more simple, we'll just start with that date.
Okay.
But what we typically do, if you haven't listened to these episodes, is we kind of get people in the mindset of when this actually took place.
Sure.
So that leads to what was going on in pop culture,
Yeah.
what we were watching, maybe what was on TV, what we might have listened to on the radio.
Sure.
Luke, help put me in the state of mind. Remind me of how long ago this was.
Yeah.
We're still talking, almost a decade now.
Right.
9 years.
Yeah.
And which, depending on how old you are, might feel like forever or yesterday.
Right.
Hit me.
All right. So back in 2012, July, it's the summer. Listening to the radio, the top 3 songs you would have heard was Call Me Maybe by Carly Rae Jepsen. Number 2 was Payphone, Maroon 5 featuring Wiz Khalifa.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. And then the one that, really made me feel like, wow, that was that long ago, was Somebody That I Used to Know, Gautier featuring Kimbra.
Which is weird because I feel like that had a resurgence in the last year or so.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Social media,
Yeah.
people using it. But, man, yeah, that's I remember the time well.
Yeah, so that was radio. If we're looking at TV, this point of the year, summer is not usually a huge TV time.
Yeah, it's that dead time between finales and season premieres.
But there were 2 things that I pulled out. One notable and one that was okay. The one that was okay was Perception on TNT. It was Eric McCormick.
Oh my gosh.
You remember that show?
I do now.
Yeah. Right. And then the other one that premiered right around that time was Newsroom on HBO.
What?
Yeah.
And that's another one that I had forgotten about.
I love that show. I love that show so much. Jeff Daniels.
Yep.
Such a great show.
Man.
Yeah.
I hate when you do this to me.
Right?
I know that we don't go back as far back as we used to.
Sure.
But even going back 9 years just kind of makes you feel like so much has happened since then.
Right.
That to go back that far or to feel like you went back that far and say, well, that's only been 9 years.
Right.
So,
but if you go to movies, this is where it gets real interesting. So one of the movies that was big at that time was Savages. Do you remember that Blake Lively movie?
Mm-hmm. A Don Winslow book.
Yeah. Another movie, Amazing Spider-Man.
2012, yeah.
Right then, right before the release of Jelly Bean. And then another one right at that time, Dark Knight Rises.
I was going to say I thought that The Dark Knight Rises was
Yep.
right in there too. I
Yep.
remember seeing all 3 of the Batman trilogy
Yeah.
to lead into the Dark Knight Rises. So
Yeah.
that was a nice night.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah. So that was
Wow.
the snapshot of maybe
Okay.
get yourself in the headspace of where you were in 2012 and what you were doing.
You look back and you're like, I was so young then.
Right.
I was just a kid.
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm with it. So at that time, Google has started to slow down a little bit more
Yep.
from the releases. And this is something that if you listen to these episodes and you listen to the last one, I believe we said something to the effect on the way out of the episode of the next big release was an interesting one, and we were kind of alluding at Kit Kat.
Yeah.
And we had completely glossed over the fact that Jelly Bean even existed.
Right.
And it was a big one.
It was.
I mean, it was a major release, but it was because it was split up. I think it was, and it wasn't so like when you look at it, this is where we really start to find less of the in-your-face kind of, oh, my phone can do this. This is really neat.
Yeah, there's less flashy updates and things that, are the things that people talk about, and more just quality of life improvements
Yeah.
or just making other processes already established smarter.
Yep. And like we've talked about before, a lot of the stuff that we had seen early on with Android was the work of handset makers doing different things to kind of squeeze more out of the hardware.
Right, yeah.
Kind of coding things in themselves. So when these versions of Android would come along, a lot of that stuff would just be kind of baked into the platform so that other people could take advantage of the same stuff.
Yeah.
Which I've always kind of struggled with because I like the idea of giving a user a specific reason to come to you
Sure.
and say, hey, our phones do this because it has this feature. And I do like, when a new device is announced, hey, if you, Samsung, I remember had one where I think it was the S3, that if you look at it and kind of, you could scroll with your eyes like on the web browser. So,
Yeah.
that was an interesting thing. It was kind of cool because you realized it wouldn't go to sleep on you if it detected you were looking at it.
Right.
And you can kind of scroll without having to touch the screen. Neat stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know that has to be built into Android.
Sure.
But it's also one of those things where I think phone makers throw almost like a proof of concept in some of their devices and stick with it for a little bit and then just kind of quietly don't talk about it again.
Right.
So I've always liked when a company will innovate and put something into their device that says, hey, you can't really get this anywhere. So when they put it into Android, it kind of opens the door and says, okay, if you're going to use our software, then you can take advantage of this stuff.
Sure.
So that's the stuff that we'll talk about. And again, on this one, it's not crazy. The list of features that we kind of, earmarked, pulled aside. As we research these for the episodes, we know that a lot of that stuff, the lists can be quite long, but they can be quite boring to most people.
Sure.
So we pull out some of the things that kind of matter the most to us, or maybe can be, I guess you would say, compared, historical context and kind of, something you can look at and say, well, without this, we wouldn't have that.
Yeah. Definitely.
So what was the big thing that they went into with Android 4.1? It was a big push on the UI and making things smoother.
Right.
Do you remember what Google called that?
Buttery smooth.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was Project Butter. And I remember feeling the difference.
Yeah.
And playing with the phone, that you were just kind of like, oh, this feels, smooth. It feels silky. It kind of glides, and it doesn't feel like it's opening an app. It kind of feels like you slide into that app and it opens, instead of just kind of like these hard, cold animations.
There were some smoother transitions.
Yeah. and to be able to kind of just move about your phone. Things just kind of felt a little silkier.
Yeah.
One of the things that they did with that was that they made so that you can do a 60 frames per second fixed rate. Now, today, you look at, refresh rates and they're 120, 144 megahertz. And so 60 frames per second, I mean, that's pretty good. If you're a gamer.
It's still good. Even now, a lot of, I would say probably 70% of people's TVs are still 60 hertz refresh rate. It's the standard, almost still the standard now.
Yeah.
And this was 9 years ago.
Right. So when you get into, refresh rates really wasn't a thing until the last couple of years when it started to get, we started to hear more about gaming phones.
Sure.
So that starts to, change the way we look at what a phone is capable of and demanding more. But 60 frames per second feels really smooth, even by today's standard.
Yeah.
With the right animations and with the right hardware. So, every version of Android is designed to be more energy efficient.
Right.
Take, better way of handling processes in the background and the battery, and to do different things to kind of get more from the hardware. So that even if you had the same hardware from one generation to the next, the experience should be better just because of the software.
Right.
Any other features in Android or in Jelly Bean? I know we've got a couple here written down that you want to touch on.
One that we kind of talked about a little bit, me and you, before we started this, was Google Now, the predictive search, and it was based on usage or the time of day or location.
Yep.
That really was very innovative for the time. It was a lot of like, oh wow, my phone. You were seeing. Now that we look at it, that was the building blocks of Google Assistant. But you were seeing like, oh, my phone is learning what I do and learning what's important to me.
It was equal parts scary and exciting for me.
Right.
Of wow, I didn't realize I had such habits.
Yes.
But also, wow, I didn't realize I had such habits.
Right.
So that my phone would, you open it up and it would have the weather for you, or it would show you your sports scores, or give you the things that you were probably going to Google, that you were going to look up. So I remember being able to put in, like, if you had looked up a flight, and it would just kind of show you the status of that particular flight number, and whether it was landed or expected to. Just little things of like, we know you're going to search this. We have this information. Now we can present it to you in a way that kind of makes sense. Yeah. And kind of saves you, a couple of steps.
Yeah, we've done the work for you ahead of time, so that all you have to do is get the information. Yeah. You don't actually have to go and find it.
Right. And that, like you said, is when you look at like a smart display now and you glance over and you see the weather, your calendar, your events, those are the things that, started to become available almost a decade ago. That we kind of look at and take for granted today.
Yep.
A couple of other changes here on the software side of things. Notifications got a nice touch up that you could kind of expand those.
Yep.
So in the past, you would just kind of get a line or what felt like a line of a message from somebody, or it would show you message from Luke. But to kind of be able to pinch and pull that apart and see that notifications they felt actionable and helpful.
Yeah, not just an information like, oh, okay, there's a message from Luke.
Alert.
Now I have to go and open messages and get to it. Now it's like, oh, I can see this. I can see what I need to see right from the notification.
Yeah, he replied, yes, that sounds cool. And then I don't have to worry about, are we meeting at that time or not?
Right.
So, and that's something that Google has kind of played with off and on with how notifications work since then. being able to have like widgetized kind of notifications, notifications that now, if you're listening to music or an audiobook, that these notification drop downs, you can actually, take action on those. So this is kind of an early start on that. Keyboard, I remember, also was a big deal. That the predictive, like the engine or the smarts of typing out messages seem to kind of get incrementally better with trying to type something. It's like, it knows the words that I'm going to. And it also felt more reactive and responsive to maybe forgiving even of what you were trying to type.
Right.
To kind of switch words around, which again is a quality of life thing that if you were there early on, you noticed it.
Right.
Because you would type a word and it's like, come on, man. You don't even know what I'm trying to say here. Like now it'll, you take for granted that it just automatically says, no, this is what you're trying to say.
Right.
Or we're just going to change the spelling of this word instead of saying, here, we're going to underline this in red because it's not right.
Right.
We're just going to start fixing these things for you.
Right.
Let's see. Camera app. That was another one. Do you remember a life before being able to go straight into your camera?
Yes.
From your lock screen?
Yes.
That sounds so like
basic now.
Yeah. Like you remember what it was like to have to hit power, open up, swipe to the camera app.
Yeah, you had to be prepared to take a picture. Now it was just way easier to just, hey, this is happening. I need to take a picture of it. I can access it right here, and then I can see it instantly and delete it
and decide, I don't want that. I missed a moment, or I took 4 shots, and I'm just going to delete these.
Right.
Without having to go in and do the full phone experience.
Right.
Being able to grab from the lock where you would normally like swipe up to remember the circle. To kind of just drag it to the edge of the circle and go straight to the camera. I was like, hey, this is really nice because there's so many times that I only open my phone just to snap a pic.
Right.
And this seems like it was designed with me in mind
right.
to do that. And then we would see other companies come out with the ability to create gestures or do things like double tap the power button to launch into your camera. But there was a time where you had to open your phone and search out your camera app.
Right.
And I am still conditioned to this day to keeping a camera icon in the bottom right corner because
I know
that's where I would always want to go for that.
Yep.
Even with shortcuts today.
I know.
I still have.
I'm the same way.
Yeah, it's really weird because I still launch into it from the icon, but there's so much that I just go straight to double tap the power.
Sure.
Or if you have another phone, you can do different gestures to draw on the screen or whatever. But yeah, this was kind of hey, we're going to make it so that you can do this on any Android phone.
Right.
Let's see. I think that's mostly the Android 4.1 stuff. We did see Android 4.2, which would come around a few months later, November.
Yeah.
And that was touted as a new flavor of Jelly Bean.
Right.
And then next year, the following July, was the even sweeter version of Jelly Bean.
Right.
The only other feature that I kind of wrote down here was, and see if you remember this, Daydream screensavers when you would plug your phone in.
Yes.
That was a whole thing for a while.
It was. It really was.
So that it was, when you were plugged in, your screen would show you different things, and there would be, maybe a refreshing social media page or account, or just some kind of fun screensaver.
Yeah. It was almost like a ticker.
Yeah.
Like almost like it needed to be plugged in so it didn't waste that much battery life refreshing those notifications.
I liked it. I remember different developers kind of took advantage of that at the time. I was like, oh, this is a really cool way of... it makes sense to have my phone plugged in at my desk.
Right.
Because I can just glance over and see these things.
Right.
Knowing that it's going to display it, but not kill the battery in the process of doing that.
Yeah.
4.2 also brought around a new clock that got a change because if you remember the original clock that launched with like the G1, and I mean that early Android stuff, that clock was getting old.
Yeah.
A little long in the tooth.
Yeah.
Last feature I have is quick settings in the notification
Yeah.
power control.
Yeah.
That's one that's really evolved now.
Yeah. And it's so much better now even than then, but that was kind of a game changer.
Yeah.
You could, open your notifications and then you had access to, changing main settings.
Yeah,
real easy.
We had discussed on a past episode about having a widget
Right.
on your screen that if you wanted that.
Right.
But this keeps you from having to clutter your home screen.
Yep.
And it just kind of pulls down from where you're going to be checking anyways.
Right.
So now when you put on your phone and you see how quick you can turn on and off Bluetooth, your flashlight, your Wi-Fi connection, go into silent, airplane mode, a lot of that stuff, wasn't really popular or built into the experience.
Well, and that was back when you still needed to toggle those things off to save battery life.
Yeah.
So when you were still in the days of if you had your Wi-Fi on, your phone was constantly searching for Wi-Fi signals, and that was killing your battery.
And there were some improvements in battery, and then the, of course, Android would continuously get optimized, but you are still managing things.
Yes.
Like, if I don't have to have this on, do I need to have it on?
Yes.
Yeah, so that was, man.
You take for
Takes you
granted
to a
now.
place,
Yeah, because, now with, we're Android 11 now. I don't know if I think I only turn my Bluetooth off or my Wi-Fi off when it's not working.
Yeah, if this should have paired by now.
Yeah, or I don't want to connect to that speaker, so I'm just going to turn Bluetooth off so I can use my phone while the speaker's still on.
Yeah. Or this Wi-Fi stinks here, I might as well just use my data because it's a better connection.
I rarely ever turn it off to conserve battery life.
Right.
And obviously now we have power settings where if you get to a certain point, it'll do all that for you if you want.
And I like the phones now will automatically re-enable your Wi-Fi when you're home because it knows, hey, this is actually a preferred network, a favorite. So it's come a long way.
Yeah, but that was the beginning of it.
Yeah. So that's about 9 years ago.
Yeah.
And 8, depending on what version of Jelly Bean you're talking about. So we're up to 2013. Luke, let's take a break, and then we'll talk about hardware.
Yeah.
We'll talk about different. We'll do a phone, a tablet, and a little device that kind of falls in between the two.
Ooh, interesting.
We'll be right back. All right, we're back. We're going to talk about some hardware.
Yeah.
We're at a point now where the phones and tablets and just devices are really starting to kind of hit the market at a rapid pace.
Yes.
A lot of phone makers throwing multiple things out each year to say that, the wait and see, that's gone.
Right.
Android's come into its own, and tablets are starting to come into their own.
Yep.
And these are 3 devices we'll talk about that aren't necessarily the biggest or the best selling or the most popular of the year, but just kind of where things were.
Sure.
So let's start with tablets, since there was a tablet introduced with Jelly Bean. I loved this tablet.
Yeah.
I have it still. I haven't powered it on in years. But I loved it, man.
Yeah.
What are we talking about, Luke?
The Nexus 7.
With the nice white back.
Yeah.
Looked kind of like a Band-Aid kind of texture. 7-inch tablet felt right.
Yes.
I mean, we'd seen 10-inch, 10.1, 8.9. We'd seen 7 before.
Yeah.
But 7 always just feels right.
Yeah.
For how I use a tablet.
Right.
kind of like a laid-back, passive
Yes.
entertainment consumption.
Yeah.
Not productivity.
Right. Yeah. So the power users, quote unquote, would still want the larger tablets.
Yep.
They want that real estate to be able to see emails fully or any kind of PDFs or anything like that. But the 7-inch tablet really had a nice niche of it was a bigger screen than your phone, so it felt like
Considerably too at the time.
Yeah.
We're looking at phones that were 4.5, 5-ish.
right.
So when you're talking 7, that's a couple of inches is quite remarkable.
Yeah, and you can consume media in different ways still on the go.
Well, books felt so much better.
Yes.
Like the Kindle app or Nook app at the time. I remember using, and magazines. There was a big play there for like Google Newsstand.
Yes.
And just these magazines you can subscribe to that were kind of optimized for
Tablets.
Yeah,
there was a lot of push through in some magazines, where we weren't seeing that up until kind of around this time, where you'd look at an article and if you had a physical copy. I remember Wired did this a lot. You could see, you'd look at an article on Wired in the physical, but then if you looked at it on a tablet, you could push through or tap something and get a little bit more information or
a video of the photo shoot of the topic they're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, that was I kind of expected magazines to still be there today.
Right.
I miss that.
Yeah.
I love magazines, man.
I know.
Every time I go on a trip for more than a day or two out of town, I pack one or two that I have been carrying around, meaning to finish.
Right.
I've got a stack sitting over there staring at me that I've carried back and forth for a long time. I had hoped that magazines would be where, today where they were at that time.
Sure.
Because it felt right. It felt like, and I don't know who's responsible for that, but
yeah,
it'd be an interesting one to.
Let's blame it on the kids.
Research. Okay, yeah.
The kids are screwing it all up.
That could be it.
I don't know.
You might be right. That's where the money is, and they're not reading magazines.
Maybe not.
So talk about the Nexus 7 tablet in terms of hardware. What do we have at that time in terms of
so it
specifications?
was a 1280 by 800 screen. It had a 1.2 gig Tegra 3 quad-core chip.
This is back when NVIDIA was still, putting out its own processors for devices, still making a play for the mobile space.
Yep.
Beefy.
Yes.
I remember at the time, like when it came to benchmarks, we've never really pushed benchmarks too heavily in our reviews or, when we score things, but there are places strictly dedicated to that.
Sure.
That I remember NVIDIA's Tegra stuff, quad-core chip, was just kind of like, is it going to get any better than this?
Right.
Like, how can it?
Yeah. There was times where, things would come out and they didn't have a Tegra, and it was like, man, can you imagine if this would have had a Tegra?
Yeah, or I was thinking about getting it, but it only has this.
Right.
Or, yeah.
That was a great chipset. It had 1 gig of RAM. And then it had different storage based on... Was it based on what you wanted to purchase? I don't remember that exactly.
There were... And this was actually, I remember, what really blew my mind was the price of this thing. It was $200 for an 8 gig storage capacity. You had the 16 and the 32. You could pay for more storage depending on how much you really wanted.
That's right.
But I can't remember the difference in prices. It couldn't have been that much more.
Yeah, but still $200 for a 7-inch tablet.
That was Android as it was intended from Google and had, the latest software with kind of benchmark specs. $200, it was just kind of like, why consider anything else?
Right.
It was like anytime I had a friend or a family member, I'm thinking about getting a tablet, this is the way to go.
Yep.
Like, it was, that price at that time was super competitive, especially compared to even at the time the Kindle.
Yes.
today, Amazon owns that.
Sure.
Like, that price has come way down.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of what you want to do with the tablet,
Yeah.
their experience, I mean, that's where you go for magazines, books,
Sure.
laid back. I mean, they have their whole ecosystem.
Right.
But at this time, $200 for a tablet was just kind of like, dude,
Yeah.
everybody should own one.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
why not have one in your house?
If you were waiting on getting a tablet, you could then now have a tablet.
Yeah. At previous Black Friday events, you would see, this RCA tablet or this Kobe tablet
Right.
was on sale for $150 or $80. Buyer beware.
Yeah.
But at this one, it was just kind of like, no, dude, go for it. It's the Nexus tablet. It's from Google. You got to have one.
Right. It has this, and this. So yeah, and then it also had a 1.2 megapixel camera on the front, and a 4,325 milliamp battery,
which is on paper a way bigger than a phone
Sure.
at the time. But I remember loving how the hardware and software work together to kind of feel like this lasts long.
Yeah.
Without feeling like, well, the tablet was great, it was cheap, but I had to plug it in all the time. Like, I would take it, I would have it charged up and just throw it in my bag, and I wouldn't have to really worry about, charging it up while
Right.
I'm on the go.
Right.
And it also, I think at the time, was micro USB. Mm-hmm. So it was the same charger that I would plug my phone in.
Right.
So it was kind of like, well, if I get low, I just plug in, to this portable bank that I'm carrying around.
Right.
I miss that tablet.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go find it, get it out of the box somewhere. Let's move over to the Samsung Galaxy Note 2.
Yeah.
We didn't even talk about the Note 1
We didn't.
in a previous episode, but we can kind of touch on that. But this was an interesting one because it told us that, one, Samsung wasn't treating it as a one-off.
Right.
And they took it seriously. They came back and beefed up the hardware, and they improved the S Pen, the digital stylus, and made it just so that it was kind of like, okay, this is a completely different experience.
Yeah.
Not just, when the Note first came out, I remember just how massive that thing felt. And even this one at 5.5 inches just felt incredibly big.
Yeah.
But then if you look at the phone that's in your pocket today,
right,
like a Pixel, well, the new Pixel 5a is, a 6.3.
Right.
So it's a much bigger screen.
Huge.
By comparison, and we're talking like a 7-inch tablet.
Yeah.
So this is like a nice hybrid kind of thing, and the term often used was phablet.
Yeah.
Because it was like a phone tablet. Did you ever spend any time with any of the Note?
I spent a little bit of time with the Note 2, actually. And I remember, I didn't have the Note 1, but I remember my friend that did, how much better he said they listened to what people said and made the 2 better. It was cool. I remember writing on it going, oh man, this is nice.
Yeah.
Like, it didn't feel gimmicky.
Right.
Like, it, I guess there's a little bit of, you're kind of forcing your productivity in a certain way if you want to use a Note type device as something with a stylus. But once you get used to that kind of workflow, it's very, very helpful.
Yeah.
And, it's still around today.
Right.
We've now we're in, in folding phones.
Right. The Note series may have gone away.
Yeah.
But we're still using that technology.
And people still love the stylus.
Yeah.
Once you get used to that type of usage, it's really, really nice.
Well, you and I are old enough to have spent time with devices that used a stylus prior.
Palm.
Yeah, so we had, these things weren't necessarily handwriting recognition, but more of like tapping on the screen, tapping on icons, a little bit of writing, but it was like if you're trying to draw letters, you had to try over and over. You would get it wrong.
Yes.
This felt baked
Yes.
to completion.
Yes.
With this particular one, the big things I remember were the ability to kind of like put the stylus to the screen and kind of like hover, and it would pop up like this fan of options of what you wanted to do, and you don't realize it until it's the type of like niche need or use, but you're like, oh man, I need this because I can mark up these documents on the go. All I need to do is just kind of like circle and point, draw arrows, and say more of this, or draw X's over things, and like if that's all, that's what I do.
Yeah.
I need to wait till I get back to my computer to do that, or I'm telling people and I'm doing it on paper. So if I have some ideas and I just want to jot down, that the note was that. I remember being kind of conflicted because I wanted that large screen. And I did have Note phones throughout the years, but I rarely used the S Pen.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't the target audience.
Yeah.
I would have rather had just the large screen, I think.
Yeah.
But for people who need that stylus and that technology, Samsung's done a tremendous job of building on that over the next, 8 years. But, so this is the Note 2 and just a couple of other hardware. What kind of specs did we have in that?
So that was a 5.5-inch screen. It was 1280 by 720. So almost the exact same resolution as the Nexus tablet, the Nexus 7.
That's a good point.
It's about 1.5 inches smaller and almost the same resolution. It looked crisp, especially with using a pen. That was the big thing, is you want a nice resolution so you can actually see what you're writing. Had a 1.6 gigahertz quad core CPU, 2 gigs of RAM, which was
quite
huge.
A bit. Yeah, quite a bit.
And then 16, 32, 64 gig expandable memory, a 1.9 inch front camera, and an 8 megapixel back camera, and then a 3100 milliamp battery, and then the S Pen with Air View and Zoom browser.
Oh yeah, where you could like tap and kind of like zoom in on things. And I'm trying to find the price here just to kind of see. I don't have the full retail price handy, but I did come up with a couple here just for sake of comparison. Sprint sold theirs for $299 with a contract.
Okay.
AT&T was $300. T-Mobile was $370 with a 2-year contract.
Okay.
We were still doing contracts at that time.
Yeah, so I would guess that you're probably looking at $799 was retail, something like that.
It was. You really kind of had to justify it to yourself, like, wow, that's a lot. Why would I spend that? Like, dude, if you're in my line of business, it's a drop in the bucket.
Right. Well, so the buddy that I used his, he was a big note taker. He was the guy that always had a notebook and would like write things down and stuff he saw or stuff he wanted to remember. And so he transitioned to this, and he could write out everything but not have to worry about having a whole bunch of notebooks in his pocket.
Well, and apps like Evernote were
stuff like that coming out.
Perfect for that.
Yeah. You had, cloud syncing where it was, then on your home computer when you got home.
This was I think I might even have a price here, about $700.
Yeah.
It was the average for the unlocked.
Yeah.
So that was the Note 2. So as we talked about earlier, Jelly Bean came out in July of 2012, but it wasn't until the new flavor a few months later we got the Nexus 4, and that was that was LG. That made that one. It was kind of the first time we got to see them get some love from Google.
It was very interesting. It was like, oh, a Nexus phone. Wait, an LG Nexus phone?
Yeah. It was. I've always had this weird thing with LG. It was like They always felt like the stepbrother or the step sibling of the
the
smartphone
kind
space.
of inferior little.
But for a long time, they dominated that entry level use. You know,
Yes.
like if you have these Optimus Q, you know, these
Right.
like entry level phones. Perfect. I think they got too ambitious with different multiple screens.
Well, they got popular, and then they just tried to
compete
innovate.
with Samsung,
Sure.
instead of owning that space that got
Right.
them where they were.
But so, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I think when we first learned about LG, it was this is the company that makes the parts for all of the other phones or all of the other TVs, or like these are the guys that are behind the scenes, that have been behind the scenes for years, that are now just starting to say, let's do it for ourselves.
Yeah, and we had both worked in sales for cell phones. I don't remember us having any T-Mobile phones there, but I remember once in a while somebody would come in with a phone that was LG, and it's like, oh, that's weird. Where'd you get that?
Yeah.
Like, it just... I don't think they ever really got their foot in the U.S. market the way they could have or maybe should have.
Right.
I remember them promoting... They had a phone out right around the time of Iron Man 2.
Yeah.
They had the phone. They had some interesting things, but I think they colored a little bit too far outside of the line for themselves.
Yeah, and then for the most part, they just kind of shifted over time to just home electronics and stuff like that. I mean, they still make phones. I mean, so I guess
they're on their way out now.
2 years ago was kind of the end of it.
So they're no longer in that. They're still supporting the phones and doing they're selling through. They may have done that now, but they are going to focus on other consumer electronics. They had some cool devices along the way. This is probably one of the ones that I felt like was going to keep them on the right track.
Sure.
This was a $300 phone.
Yeah.
When you're talking outright $300.
That was huge.
When everybody else is coming in with a $600 phone,
right?
You know, $500 even. You start at $299
without a contract.
Without a contract. With
what?
Android the way it's supposed to be. Unlocked. Just put it with your carrier. Kind of felt like, oh, this is it. The U.S. industry is going to finally get it.
Yeah.
It's going to take off.
This is the future.
This is the way phones are going to be done.
This is what we've seen overseas.
Yeah.
You know, we've been scouring GSM Arena and looking and being like, oh, I wish I could just buy this phone.
Yep.
But I can't because my carrier's this. I have to get one of these.
If only.
Right. Right.
This was a great package for $299. It had a 4.7-inch screen, 1280 by 768, so it was a nice HD screen. 2 gigs of RAM with a 1.5 gigahertz processor, 8-megapixel camera, 1.3 on the front. It also had support for Qi Wireless, which at the time was a little early.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't see too many phones. It certainly was not even close to a standard.
Right.
It was still kind of like, man, there's some other players. You could even say it was kind of like HD DVD and Blu-ray.
Right.
You know, like one of these is going to emerge.
Right.
I think Google has it right by playing with this standard.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Remember the charger for it?
Yes.
It was like, it kind of looks like what we saw from, you know, the old Google, the Google Homes, or what was it? It's like a little circle, half, like almost like an alarm clock.
It was kind of like, it had like a puck with let me see if I can find one.
It was set up at like a 45-degree angle almost. So it was almost like a charger and a phone stand in one.
Yes. So that you could kind of look at it and kind of glance at.
And you could use the Daydream stuff then also.
Right.
You know, so it was a 2-in-1.
So it was like if you had a circle and then you kind of halved it at 45 degrees.
Right.
And the ability to just kind of glance at your phone and see your notifications.
Right.
Or just have it.
And it was charging.
Yeah. Like without having to plug it in. You
Yeah.
just grab it and go. Like,
Yeah.
This is perfect. This is the way it's going to be forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, they also had a 16 gig version for $350.
Okay.
Which, again, we had talked about before. 8, 16, 32. It kind of felt like we were never going to get out of that storage capacity. I never really got to spend extended time with the Nexus 4, but for the people that I knew that had it, they loved it. And I think that I wish it would have done better. Not just for LG's sake, but I think for where the Nexus and then later the Pixel pricing could have stayed.
Yes.
We're getting into that price again now with the A series of Pixels, but the industry had slowly started to move into this like, hey, you can get a great phone for $300, maybe $400 if you really want to spend it. And then all of a sudden we're talking $900,000 phones again. This was one of those like, man, if this would have done a whole lot better,
right,
we might have been able to stay at this price point for a while.
Right.
Luke, I don't have anything else here to talk about. I've looked at all my notes here. Do you have anything else you wanted to add?
No.
Jelly Bean or device-wise?
No.
All right. Well, next up, for sure,
KitKat.
KitKat, Android 4.4. And it's not long after this 4.3.
Right. 4.3 is end of July 2013.
KitKat was October.
Yeah.
So it was just right around the corner.
Which was very strange because 4.3, I mean, we barely hit on any of the features because most of those were just behind the scenes or
like, why not save that?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, why not just bake that into the next big announcement?
Right.
Because then you're back to fragmentation talk again.
Yeah.
I have Jelly Bean. Well, what version of Jelly Bean?
Right. Oh, gosh.
But what about KitKat? I heard that,
That's all right. They're getting better at it. We've seen over time that they're getting better at it.
Yeah, it's slowing down, and I think it really starts to become more kind of like looking forward to the annual.
Yes.
Oh, I can't wait to see what they do next
year. Well,
year.
and I think the consumer mindset is starting to shift at this point, too.
It wasn't an arms race anymore.
Right.
It was, let's just see what they come out with.
Yep.
All right. We'll talk about KitKat on the next episode.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.